welcome to the first meeting officially. This is going to be my talk on the history of hacking. So this talk sort of started its life as, oh, I'm going to do the history of security. I'm going to go back to like ancient Roman times and talk about like the first lock. And then I found out that's kind of like a little bit boring to me and I didn't really want to look at it. So I was like, okay, cool. We'll just narrow it to cybersecurity, narrowing the scope, we'll get more into it. Even that is like a pretty wide subject. So this is like the history of hacking, asterisk, small text, but mostly malware. Not everything in this is malware, but a lot of it is malware, partially because it's kind of what I find interesting, and partially because it's a good gateway to talk about like a lot of other security concepts that we'll sort of get into. So yeah, that's it for this talk. All right, so hello, like I said, my name's Henry. I'm a fourth year CPE major. Some fun facts about me: I'm a resident advisor in Yosemite dorms. Anybody here from Yosemite? Just curious. No? Okay, cool. I love rock climbing, hiking, anything outdoorsy. Also a big fan of like hammocking out in Poly Canyon. Super good time. And this summer I was in LA. I was working for a company called Keysight. Yeah, good time. Enjoyed the company. Did not enjoy LA personally. Not a big fan. Yeah. All right, we're going to move on to the actual talk now. So we're going to start out with this glorious black box. Who knows what this is? Okay, a few people. All right, so this is what we call Enigma. This is an invention of the Germans during World War II. Basically, during World War II, radio communications were fairly new, and people realized pretty early on, hey, if I just send, like, attack the British at 0500 at this time, there's a good chance that the British are going to hear that and then be ready with, like, a counteroffensive or defense or whatever. So they started encrypting their messages. This is not the first form of cryptography ever by a long stretch, but it is a big advancement in cryptography. Cryptography, for those who don't know, is the study of encryption, being able to take a message, algorithmically turn it into effectively gobbledygook that nobody can read, and then turning it back into a readable message. So this is a big advancement in that. This was called Enigma. It had over 150 million settings, which is important because if you got your hands on one, you still couldn't use it to decrypt whatever message you'd seen. They change the configurations every day, so if you learn the configuration for one day, it's only good for one day, you can only read the messages for that day. Yeah, it was pretty damn effective. It worked by, you had a keyboard, sorry, the picture's really low resolution, but bear with me. You have a keyboard here. No, this is the keyboard. You'd press, in this case, like the letter T. That would be sent through this plug board, which literally all it does is it maps one letter to another. In this case, it's mapping T to K. That then goes through, and you can configure this to map any letter to any letter. That's part of the configuration. That then gets sent through these rotors, which do the same thing, basically. They map one letter to another, one letter to another, keeps going through, and then it goes back through all the rotors. And it goes back through the plug board, and then it connects to this light board, which show you the letter for the encrypted text. So, I'd just be over here, typing out hello world, and then my buddy would be looking at what lights we're turning on and writing that down. And then that would be the encrypted ciphertext that is sent over the radio waves. And what's really difficult about this is that the plug board doesn't change, right? That just stays the same. The rotors, on the other hand, every time you send a letter, this rotor clicks over one, changing the whole thing. And then when it's done a full rotation, this rotor clicks over one. And then when it's done a full rotation, this one clicks over one. And it just keeps going, and there's like a limitless number of configurations. So if you're just sitting here mashing A, it's going to light up a different letter every time, which makes it, again, really, really difficult to crack. So, but they did crack it, spoiler alert, thanks to partially this guy right here. This is Alan Turing. He's sort of credited as the father of modern computation. We're not going to get into those accomplishments right now. They are super cool. You should definitely read up on them, but right now we're just talking about cryptography. So what did he bring to the table? Well, basically, he helped develop this machine called the bomb machine. Bomb with an E, hence the funny title. He worked for GCHQ, which stands for the Government Communications Headquarters in Bletchley Park. And being the machine head that he was, he'd already done a fair bit of work on theorizing computers. He said, let's build a machine to fix this problem. So, because person can't go through 150 million settings, but a computer, easy. So he took advantage of two flaws to create a mechanized, really a machine that could crack Enigma. Flaw number one, Enigma never mapped a letter to itself. So if going back to the example, if I'm just mashing A on that keyboard, no matter how many times I press it, A is never going to light up, which lets you eliminate a huge number of possibilities, possible configurations for the machine. The other flaw that it took advantage of is the fact that the Germans, every morning, right after they changed the codes for the day, would sound out a weather report. And in that weather report, they would end up by saying, "Hail Hitler." So the British could receive this encrypted ciphertext and know, okay, the last X letters of this communication say "Hail Hitler." We know this. Based on that, they can use that information to, again, narrow down a lot of the possible combinations that you can rule out with just basic math, pretty much. I'm not going to go into it right now because that's a whole talk on its own. But Turing used these two facts to create this, the bomb machine, which there are still several working ones in the world, actually, mostly in museums and stuff. But it was basically able to go through these combinations very, very quickly and test them, and only display configurations that were possible, that could possibly be it. It turned out multiple possible configurations, but it was still enough where a person could go through these and determine, okay, this is gobbledygook. There's no way this is the proper configuration. But this one actually produced meaningful German from this ciphertext, so it's probably the right one. So, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Oh yeah, and then a big challenge for them was that they had to crack it within 24 hours, because again, they changed the codes every 24 hours, the Germans did. They switched their configurations, so it was very important to do it within 24 hours, hence the importance of this machine. And then, one other thing, it's very common, if you've heard this history before, to think that Turing invented this machine from scratch, basically single-handedly. Common misconception, not the case. He took a lot of inspiration, he basically improved on an existing Polish machine called the Bomba machine. And he also had a lot of other people he was working with. So he is a huge contributor to this, but he's not the sole creator of this machine. Okay, we're going to move on to a lot in the future. Phone phreaking. So, back in the olden days, when you had to use payphones to make long-distance calls to other countries and such, you had to pay for these long-distance calls, and they were fairly expensive. And people figured out a really amusing way around this. Basically, these payphones, the way they work is when you are dialing the number, you know that noise your phone makes when you hit a digit when you're dialing? Kinda, maybe, yes, okay. So nowadays that does absolutely nothing. That's just for pure nostalgia factor. Back then, the point of it was that the phone network was actually listening for that. It would actually transmit that over the phone network, and the phone network would hear that tone and say, well, that's a 4. And then when you dial the entire number, that would give you, an entire phone number. The phone network could then connect you to that phone number, ring, do all its phone networky stuff. So back to payphones real quick. What's fun about these is that if there wasn't money in the machine, it wouldn't generate the tones. But it was still connected to the phone network. So what you could do is, if you could play the tones that it was expecting through the microphone of the phone, the phone network would actually accept those and connect your call, if you could make them. And what makes this even funnier is you could create those with this stupid little whistle, which was sold in boxes of cereal. So musically inclined people, I shit you not, would take these whistles to the phone boxes and then play them into the phone, and they could connect phone calls, long-distance phone calls, for free. Now, the phone companies sort of caught on to this after a while because they realized, hey, these phone boxes are making a lot of long-distance calls, which they could see, and not bringing in a lot of money. So eventually this was patched. This is not how modern phone networks work. They are way more complicated than this, but I thought it was a fun little story that I wanted to include just because, I don't know, a professor told me about this. I thought it was pretty funny. All right, it's time for something modern. You guys are sick of old technology. We want something new. So we're going to floppy disks. And this is the Apple II. Groundbreaking stuff, I know. So we're going to be talking about a virus called the Elk cloner. This is pretty much the first piece of self-replicating malware I was able to find. Does everybody not know what malware is, by the way? No shame, just wondering. Okay, cool. Malware is just malicious software. So it's any piece of software that does something you wouldn't want to happen, i.e., just starts using up your entire CPU, or fills up all the space on your drive, or deletes everything from your drive, conversely. Any piece of software like that. It's not magic, it's just software. What is kind of cool though is some malware is self-replicating, meaning you don't have to do anything, it just spreads to other computers. So in this case, this is before, forget Wi-Fi, forget the internet, this is before USB drives. So it's spread over floppy disks. And the way it worked is it would sit on a computer, and then when you insert a floppy disk, it would infect the boot sector of the floppy drive with whatever virus. And then that would be on the floppy drive. You take the floppy drive out, plug it into another computer, now that computer's infected, and it spreads and spreads and spreads. And this is basically just a practical joke, is all it really was. This is it. When the payload was deployed, all it did was print this cute little poem to your screen. So, it wasn't bad, it didn't do anything bad, it was just like a prankster who's like, hey, can I make this work? They could. What's interesting about this is what's to come, because we're going to talk about some other self-replicating viruses that were a lot more devastating than this. But before we get to those, we need something else. We need the internet, because there's a pretty big limit on how much your virus can spread over floppy disks. People carrying floppy disks aren't the most effective way for your virus to spread. What would be great is an interconnected network of all the computers on the planet. That would be perfect. Luckily, a bunch of universities and the Department of Defense were working on just that. This is ARPANET. This is the first, sort of the first iteration of what we now call the internet. As you can see, it's a bunch of, sorry, this is a really bad quality picture, but it's just, basically just universities. You've got UCLA, UCSD, or B, can't tell, Utah, all these places on this map. And this is in December 1969, as you can see, and over time it grew to include some places on the East Coast. This next one is June 1970. Sorry, I meant to get rid of this, ignore this from now on. And then the next one is from September 1973. So over only the course of a few years, it grew pretty fast. You can see now we've got London on here, going all the way across the Atlantic, got Hawaii, and it's growing pretty quick. Pretty much research institutes were working on this as like almost theory of communication, like can we have computer-driven communications over long distances? Because prior to this was like phone lines and telegraphs. So it was a pretty big innovation, as we all know today. And then the other interesting thing about it is, why the military? Why did the military care about the internet? Well, it was during the Cold War, and the military wanted a way to basically ensure that if the USSR ever launched nukes against the US, that the US would be able to retaliate, no matter what happened. And so for that reason, the internet is designed to be basically indestructible. It's designed so that if the USSR ever decided to nuke this spot on this fiber optic line here, all the packets would just immediately start routing this way with no packet loss, no nothing. So it was designed to be resilient above pretty much all else. In 1971, the Navy commissioned the first penetration test against this network. A penetration test is basically you pay someone to hack your system or try to hack your system. Why would you do that? Because if they hack your system, and they can tell you how they did it, and if they do that, then you can fix those vulnerabilities so that no one else can do it. So penetration testing is a pretty common practice nowadays. I think this is the first time it was done for a cyber thing ever. What's up?
Henry, where did you get those maps?
Where did I get those maps? There's this cool site, I don't remember what it's called, that has like a history of the early internet, and you can go further than this as well, further forward in time. The first one is as far as you can go back, but you can go forward further than this and watch the internet sort of develop. Kind of cool. So yeah, 1971 they did the first penetration test, first cyber penetration test. Penetration tests are very standard practice nowadays. They're done by like big companies, big and small, all different sorts of products. And then in 1974, they standardized the TCP/IP stack. We're not going to talk about that right now because the TCP/IP stack is also like its own talk entirely. But basically, it meant the networks were somewhat standardized and meant that they were more compatible with each other. These networks were made by a bunch of different groups at different times, and so they were largely incompatible for a significant chunk of time. But yeah. And then this is not physical map of the internet, obviously, this is more logical, but this shows the separation of ARPANET, which is what we started out with, from MILNET. This is basically the military said, hey, this network has a lot of people on it, and we're kind of concerned about security, so we're just going to shove this off into its own thing and sort of make them less connected. Fun fact, MILNET evolved into what we now call SIPRNet and NIPRNet, which are to this day used for the transmission of classified and top secret documents. And then this is like a fun little thing that I found. It doesn't really fit in the talk, if I'm honest, but it's sort of what IP blocks have been allocated and to who. The green patches are either unallocated. This map's probably pretty old, I think pretty much everything's been allocated at this point, but yeah. Fun little map. Okay, moving on. We have the internet. We only need one more thing for like a huge virus that destroys everything. Home computers. So in the 1980s, home PCs started connecting to the internet. I don't know the specific date because like there wasn't like one computer that came out with something like you can connect to the internet now. They all had like add-on cards that made them able to connect. And I wasn't able to find when the first one of those came out. So sometime in the 80s, people started connecting to the internet from their homes. And yeah. We all know that this couldn't possibly be a security problem, a large interconnected network of a bunch of computers with not necessarily super technical people using them. This couldn't possibly be a problem at all, except it could. So one of the first big viruses that really took a toll on the internet was called the Morris worm. It was made by this guy. His name is Robert Morris. We're going to talk more about him. He's very unhappy right now for a reason in this picture. This worm, I should probably talk about what a worm is. A worm is basically a self-replicating virus, if I recall correctly. Pretty much it, yeah. Self-replicating piece of malware. This particular worm took advantage of several vulnerabilities in several programs, including the SendMail program, which I tried to install over here, because you still can, apparently. It still exists. And something called the Finger Network Service, don't know what that is, we're going to talk about it a little bit later. And just people using weak passwords in general, which is something you can always rely on as a hacker. Morris claims that this worm wasn't designed to do any damage. What's funny about that statement is, Morris was a grad student at Cornell at the time. So he's studying at Cornell and he's sort of just sitting here like, I wonder if I can make a self-replicating piece of software that just spreads everywhere. I wonder if that's possible. And he releases it onto the MIT network rather than his own to make it look like he didn't do it. And in addition to that, he added this, originally he was going to just let the computers report if they'd been infected or not, and if they'd been infected, he wasn't going to reinfect them. But then he thought, but what if the programmers don't just say that the computer's been infected already? Then they won't get infected. So he made it reinfect computers that already claim to be infected, which is not something you do if you're just doing this for fun. Like, that's kind of a malicious thing to do. Anyway, so yeah, claims he didn't want it to do any damage, okay. What happened is because it was able to reinfect systems that were already infected, there was like a 10% chance or something that it would reinfect a given system. It would just keep reinfecting the same systems again, and again, and again, and again. And it created what we call a denial of service attack, where a machine is so busy doing either malicious tasks or handling malicious traffic or doing something that it's not supposed to, that it can't handle real, actual tasks that it's supposed to be doing. And basically, Morris brought the internet to its knees. That's what happened. The estimated impact of this was somewhere between $100,000 and $10 million, which today equates to $26 million. And their solution to this problem, because this thing's just going around like reinfecting everything, is to actually break the internet apart. Like, you know how I said it was this group of segmented networks that were still kind of segmented? Well, they just disconnected them all. And then everyone went away, cleaned up their network, and then they put them back together. Like, can you imagine if the US government, or literally any entity today, just said, we're gonna take down the internet for 2 days, don't worry, it'll be back in a bit. Like, it was nuts. And it was also, Robert Morris became the first person to be tried as a felon under the Federal Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which had been made like just a few years earlier. He got off with like a few $1,000s fine in community service, which is pretty light considering he did at least $100,000 in damages on accident. But yeah, that's the first piece of malware we got. I thought it was pretty funny. Oh yes, sorry. And then this. So I did a bit of digging on the actual vulnerabilities he exploited. First of all, this network service uses the function called gets. Who knows about gets? Just curious. Okay, a few people. You all know not to use gets, right? Okay, let's just, for those who aren't in the know, let's just look at the manual page for gets. So, there we go. Okay, man gets. All right? Never use this function. Deprecated. So yeah, that's just a point I wanted to make. If you have this function in your program, it's just a vulnerability. Off the bat, you don't have to do anything else, it's automatically a vulnerability. It is completely stupid. And then that's like a 10 out of 10 on the vulnerability stupidity scale, right? And then the other one somehow tops it. Let me get back to my slides real quick. Perfect, okay. The other one tops it because this SendMail piece of software, which still exists, hopefully it's fixed now, supported shell commands in emails. So basically, you could just write an email on your machine, you put some special tags around some shell commands, and the mail server would just run them blindly no matter what it was. That was like a 15 out of 10 on like the vulnerability stupidity scale. It is mind-boggling. Anyway.
I mean, what kind of horrible shell commands can you do?
Literally anything. If you wanted the mail server to delete everything on the server, you could do that. If you wanted to mine Bitcoin on the server, didn't exist at the time, but nowadays you could do that. Like, literally anything. It's as if you're just sitting in front of, you could use it as if you were just sitting in front of the computer and do whatever you want. You could literally set up a remote session where you did literally that. You just use it as your daily computer. Anyway, it's not a feature, it's a bug. Sorry, it's not a bug, it's a feature. End of my slight tangent. All right, on to the next virus. So this is the Melissa virus. This is a slight change in tone from our academic who's trying to maybe break the internet. Originally, the original file, the original infection, patient 0, if you will, of the Melissa virus was spread by promising access to passwords to adult sites via a newsletter called alt.sex. The virus itself was named after a stripper that somebody met in Las Vegas. I believe the creator. Oh, is it? Come on. This guy met in Las Vegas. This is, what's his face? David Smith. This is the creator of the Melissa virus and a super dated BBC article about it. And the way it spread is, so yeah, once patient 0, how it spread is it would send out emails that look like this. So you get an email from someone you know, because they've been infected with this virus, and it would say, here is that document you asked for, ... Don't show anyone else, winky face. Which is like, I don't know, would you click on this email? okay, cool. A lot of them were a lot more blunt than this. Like, I thought this was a bit out there. Some of the other ones, literally the attachments were like nakedwife.png. Like, they were pretty to the point. But it's okay because everyone showed restraint, realized this was a scam, and didn't click on it. No, they didn't. Caused $80 million in damage. Because nobody had any restraint and nobody knew what phishing was outside of, a rod and reel. And it affected over 1 million email addresses. Oh yeah, it took down email providers, small ones like Microsoft. And it was a couple of days before they got this thing under control, before email was working again, because it just generated, once you were infected, it would send out this email to your top 50 contacts. So it was just generating a massive amount of email traffic, like truly a stupid amount, and it was bringing down providers like Microsoft, and it was crazy. They didn't have to break the internet apart to fix this one, probably because it was 1999 at this point. You couldn't really do that. That was no longer an option. Yeah, that's the Melissa virus. Who'd already heard of this, by the way? I'm just kind of curious. Okay, so most people have. That's good. I'm glad I'm not like re-explaining stuff that you already know. All right, who's heard of Stuxnet, actually? Raise of hands. Okay, the same people. So Stuxnet, this one I kind of struggled to explain. So we're going to try this. All right, so we're going to start at the beginning. So the US believed that Iran was developing nuclear weapons, is the long and the short of it. And in order to develop nuclear weapons, you need nuclear fissile material, like, uranium-235, plutonium, whatever. Or 238, I don't know. I'm not a physicist. You need some nuclear boom stuff. And so to get that, you need to use centrifuges to separate uranium, the different isotopes of uranium, to get the highest, the densest uranium, weapons-grade uranium. So that's what's required of it. And they knew Iran was doing this, and they wanted to put a stop to it. So they maybe, technically neither side has admitted to this, but they maybe created a virus called Stuxnet. Okay, so how does Stuxnet work? Basically, it was designed to spread over two vectors, network and USB. So over USB, pretty self-explanatory. It's basically like the elk cloner we talked about earlier. Gets infected on some sort of storage medium and then spreads from computer to computer. And it also spreads over local internet. So like if you plugged a Stuxnet USB into a computer on Calpi's campus, probably most of the campus would get infected, kind of thing. Actually, I don't know how well our network is segmented, besides the point. And you might be asking yourself, why the USB drive? Because the internet was very much a thing. This is 2010. The internet is very much a thing. So why bother with USBs? The answer is, Iran's facility for harvesting uranium, or purifying, we'll go with purifying uranium, was air-gap, an air-gap network. What that means is there is no physical connection between the outside world, in the way of the internet, and their internal network. So no amount of hacking can hack a gap of air. That is unbeatable, unless you just use a USB drive. So that's what they did. It would find other computers on the network. It would update. This is another kind of neat thing, is that malware can update. It can go out to the internet and say, hey, do you have a newer version of this malware? And sometimes it does. Kind of a new thing for the time. And then, and then eventually when it gets to this nuclear purification system, what's up?
How did the USB get into the facilities?
Probably not the greatest security. Yeah. In a perfect world, if you had a facility like this, you would say no USB drives, no floppy drives, no nothing between inside and outside. And actually, I was at slight side tangent. I was looking at a project for the US military, and they want 3D printers that can be run off of not SD cards, not USB drives, but DVDs to prevent stuff like this. Because according to the US military, you can't put a virus on a DVD. Just kidding, that's not what they actually say, but it's kind of what they're implying. Yeah, tangent. To answer your question, you shouldn't be able to in a perfect world, but they probably just weren't that concerned about it. because nobody had seen anything like this before. Okay, yeah, now we're gonna go on to the payload. So once it was actually in the facility, what does it do? Okay, so it looks for a piece of software made by a company called Siemens. Siemens makes industrial control equipment and PLCs. PLCs are programmable logic controllers, I think. Yeah. And basically, it looked for this software that was connected to these nuclear centrifuges, and if it found that, it would infect the PLC and make the centrifuges spin a little bit faster. Didn't make them blow up, didn't make them stop, didn't do anything crazy, just made them spin a little bit faster. It also made the software report that they were doing just fine. Everything was normal, they weren't spinning too fast. Basically what they did was just create the most nightmarish bug. Like a bug that is really hard to notice, doesn't show up that often, and everything reports is fine. Because the goal was not to like make a big fuss and blow up the facilities and then just start again. The goal was to just make it harder for them, make it take longer, and it delayed them by months. Yeah, and then we should probably talk about, oh yeah, so why do we think it was like the US, oh, and Israel as well, both of them were, well, maybe in on this. The reason we think that is because this used 4 zero-day vulnerabilities. Who knows what a 0 day is? Okay, same people as before, mostly. A 0-day vulnerability is a vulnerability where it is seen for the first time in use in the wild. The reason it's called a 0 day is because the makers of whatever software it's exploiting don't have any notice to fix it. They just have to fix it as soon as they can because it's already being used. So 0 days are pretty valuable in the hacking community because if you have a 0 day and nobody knows about it, literally everyone is unsafe. Well, everybody who's running whatever software you're trying to target. The moment it's patched, people start updating, it becomes less effective. But if nobody can be patched, everyone's vulnerable. So 4 0 days is a truly mind-boggling amount of 0 days that is only really possible when you're talking about a nation state or at least an organized group. It also made use of 2 certificates made by stolen private keys. I'm really not going to get into the cryptography of that because that is like 2 or 3 talks. But basically all you need to know is that most pieces of software come signed, which means that they have a little bit of metadata attached to them that actually authenticates, hey, this software was made by Google or Apple or whoever. Problem is they are made by these things called private keys, and private keys can be stolen. So if you have someone's private key, you can make certificates that look like they're from that person or company. Most of the time people are really worried, or really like, most of the time people notice when this kind of thing happens, and so they replace their certificates, like they update them, and then the old one is useless. But these ones, I mean, 2 certificates, again, it's crazy. Like nobody had seen anything like this before. And the other reason we know we believe it's from the US government / Israel is because it's so targeted. Like it didn't do anything on any machine that wasn't connected, except spread. It didn't do anything on any machine that wasn't connected to this industrial control equipment. It was obviously very, very targeted at this specific setup. It wasn't trying to get like money or break anything else, it was just targeted at this one thing. And again, it was very difficult to diagnose. It wasn't like anybody was trying to make a big deal or try and say like, look what I did. The whole point was not to get noticed. So yeah, that's Stuxnet. Something back a few months. All right, this is the last piece of malware we're going to be covering. Oh, what's up?
So did it only stay in the industrial complex, or did it get out?
It definitely got out.
How far did it go?
You know, actually, there was a Wikipedia page I found that talked about this. Let me pull it up. Here we go. That's the table of the share of infected countries. So if it only stayed in the nuclear facility, this would be 100%. So yeah, clearly it got out. This is Wikipedia, you know, take that for what it's worth. So yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah? All right, cool. Stuxnet. All right, this is the last thing we're gonna cover, WannaCry, something more modern, something people have probably, I hope, heard of. So, we talked about 0 days and why they are very, very effective. And we already know that the US keeps these 0 days because they use it in Stuxnet. Again, because they want to be able to hack who they want to be able to hack without having to deal with pesky patches. So they have these exploits sitting around. And in March of 2017, a group called the Shadow Brokers, I don't have a date for this, sorry. At some point, this group called the Shadow Brokers hacked into the NSA, which is crazy, and stole the NSA's 0-day exploits. And the NSA realized this, and they're starting to go like, oh shit, these 0-day exploits that they've been using for like 5 years, so they know how effective they are just out in the wild. Or not out in the wild, only this group has them, but like, somebody has our exploits. So they needed to get them patched, because they can't just have these exploits out in the wild just being used. So they do notify, in this case it was Microsoft, of this specific vulnerability we're going to be talking about. They notify Microsoft of this, and Microsoft puts out a patch in March of 2017, which is good because that's before the Shadow Brokers released it in April of 2017. So what's the big deal? It was patched. Because everyone updates their computers the moment there's a patch available, right? So that they're not vulnerable to security bugs, right? No, they don't. So there's still a ton of vulnerable systems out there because like people don't update their stuff. And it pretty much exploded immediately. So that's how it spread. I think most of us are familiar, well at least some of us are familiar with how WannaCry worked. It's markedly different than pretty much any malware to come before it. What it did is it encrypted all the files on your drive, so you couldn't read them. All your files are basically gone. And then it demanded ransom, hence the name ransomware. WannaCry is a form of ransomware that, for ransomware typically in Bitcoin, for the decryption of your files. So yeah, that's what it did, that's how it spread. It exploded basically immediately, because unlike most malware, you didn't need to do anything. Like, it spread over a Microsoft protocol called SMB, which is basically Windows File Share. So if you had Windows File Share on and somebody in your network got this malware, everyone on the network with Network File Share on would immediately get it. So it spread like wildfire, exploded. It cost, wait for it, $4 billion. Not nationwide, worldwide. And yeah, it was a pretty big deal. All right, that's all I have on my slides. Thanks everyone for showing up, appreciate it. Hope you all enjoyed this.